All right, how y'all doing? Um, all right, so for the past several weeks, we've really spent most of our time just kind of examining our operation from A to Z, everything from what we do schematically, what we're doing from a roster perspective, and everything that we're doing operationally to provide resources and support our players. So we're pretty excited to get to this point in Indianapolis, where it's really our first look with the draft class. Guys that we've been scouting and trying to get to know for the past 2 years. We get to spend some time face to face and get to know them more intimately. So it's always a really exciting time for us, on the college scouting side. And then it's also been really neat over the past several weeks just to integrate Ken and our new offensive coaches, see that staff come together, and the work that they've done, really early in this offseason has been excellent. So we come in, looking really with a mind for improvement. That really has to be our focus every season, regardless of how we end, because it's a really competitive league, and we know our other 31 competitors are doing the exact same thing. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Why is that huge side important to you guys?
Do I seem not cold to you? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I can't control the professional reputation other than, in my role, I believe in doing everything that's in the best interest of the organization. And in my role at times, that does lead to very difficult decisions, particularly from a roster standpoint. But, for us, the human element really is first and forefront, both in terms of how we treat our players, how we treat our coaches. That doesn't mean that you won't have difficult conversations or have to make, some difficult judgments. But at the end of the day, we are dealing with human beings, and that'll always be first and foremost.
Andrew, is there anything you would report on the Nick Chubb situation? Progress and making it a real.
Yeah, it's a good question, Tony, and I understand that Nick is a popular discussion point. I meant when I said about him at the end of the season. Any conversations that we have with him or his reps, honestly, will stay between will stay between us. If anything were to change with his status, you guys would be the first to know when that does happen.
As far as his progress, how much do you have any update on where he is in that recovery?
Yeah, Chris, he's done a great job. Yeah, you guys know Nick. He works his tail off. He does everything in his power to make sure that he can recover as quickly as possible. It still is very early, and we're 6 months away from training camp. So to say anything more definitively than I did at in the middle of January, it would probably be inaccurate. Yeah, Mary Kay, that is accurate. Deshaun will begin throwing, next month. He's worked his tail off in terms of his rehab and recovery. He's in a really good place. We're excited, when the spring hits and we can get him back on the field. But he's making really good progress, and we're really excited to see that continue.
Andrew, last year you told me age is not a guardrail, but in the last 3 years we have half the number of underclassmen entering the draft. How does that affect the draft for you, and does that change the value of some of the draft picks, especially later in the draft?
Not necessarily. I think the way that we look at any prospect's profile is really as a combination of a number of different factors. So we don't really go into looking as a vacuum. So let's take age specifically. It's not like, okay, hey, if you're, X years old, you're off the board or we're not going to consider you. We do try and take each player individually and consider all the circumstances, risk factors, things that make that prospect unique, and ultimately place a value on that individual from there. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you. No update there. So good question, Scott. I think where the salary cap landed, that was in the range of our projections. I can't say that we had the number pinpointed. I wouldn't say that it has a fundamental impact in terms of the, in terms of our planning. But obviously, there are more available dollars across the league, so that could impact markets accordingly as you think about free agency and extensions. Honestly, we just look at it historically in the sense of each position has maybe what we would call a different aging curve. And then even within the position, the style, there may be a subset of aging curves based on the style of player or the specific risk factors that they have in their career. So there's not necessarily a blanket formula for deciding when receivers may decrease their production as they go further in their career, but we do try and take like a approach with different cohorts of likely profiled individuals. I'm going to give you the same response I give every year on the draft class. There are good players across all rounds, across all positions.
And your development through the
As a general manager, I wouldn't say necessarily a book that necessarily played into my philosophy as a general manager. What I would point out, probably just in terms of my personal life or professional career, there's a book called Ordering Your Private World by Gordon MacDonald. It's actually something my pastor recommended to me a couple years ago, and it really totally changed my approach in terms of balancing the personal and professional constraints or weights that come on trying to be a general manager, trying to be a good husband, be a good father, and all those things. That really had a huge impact on my life.
Andrew, given you guys won 11 games this year with all different quarterbacks, Joe Flacco obviously was a great story. So what went into the decision to move on from Alex Smith?
Yeah, you know what? It's something that Kevin has addressed previously in other press conferences. I really don't have much more to say than that.
There's a player that's projected to be drafted, didn't play college, CFL, and his name is Montez State.
Yeah.
Do you think that going forward, there's going to be more players that are going to not go to college because they have the ability to go straight to the CFL and still become drafted?
No, I actually think that's a one-off. I think as you all get to know Quantez throughout the spring, you'll realize that his path and his story was pretty unique. And I would say that young man, in terms of everything that he overcame and managed over the last 4 or 5 years, has been nothing short of outstanding. So even if he ends up not being a Cleveland Brown, he's one of those guys that you just kind of root for and want to see him have all the success in the world when he gets in the NFL.
You have 3 offensive tackles coming out this season. Do you anticipate them all being ready for April 15th?
Probably too early to say on April 15th. We do anticipate them being ready for the season, Tony. They're all recovered. They all have different injuries, so different time horizons for their recovery. But all 3 of them have been working hard. All 3 of them are progressing as appropriate, and we do anticipate having them available to us throughout the season. Do you mind repeating your question? I didn't quite hear you. Yeah, so we were pleased with how the run game turned out throughout the year. Obviously, Nick's 1 in a million, and maybe he's 1 in a billion actually. And so we're not going to get the consistent explosive runs that you get with the best back in football. But we also do firmly believe that the run game is predominantly predicated on the strength of the offensive line and then the actual scheme. Obviously, when you have a difference maker like Nick and someone who can create at the level that he can truly elevate that area of the game. But we did have to learn to run without him, and we were able to do it effectively enough. But obviously, Nick is a difference maker. Do you encourage him to? Yeah, so good question, Mary Kay. We really just look at it, what's the best thing for the team and how we think about, roles from that perspective. Kevin will have a good beat on that. Ultimately, that will be his decision, but we really will feel good whichever way it lands. I'm afraid to answer that question either way, Tony. I mean, you know me, I can't keep money in my pocket, so we'll see how it goes over the next couple of weeks. I can't predict that right now. Yeah, we were really excited about Ken. Ken smart, former high-level quarterback in college, NFL quarterback, played in a number of different leagues, a number of different systems, and then actually transitioned into the non-playing side as a pro scout before working with Cam as his quarterback coach. Obviously, the work that he did with Josh in Buffalo was outstanding. Coordinated a top 5 offense over 2 seasons, in Buffalo. And so what the allure to Ken was his varied experience in a number of different offenses, working with different styles of quarterbacks, and then ultimately just his work sample, as a coordinator. We thought he fit us, in our players. We love his expertise in, the spread and RPO game and drop back world as well. And we think that he's a fantastic addition to the staff. Let me go Ashley first. I'll come back to you, Tony.
When you talked to Kevin, did you talk about how extensive that measurement process was? How important is that to you that process is as extensive as it is, and what did you learn about him that you didn't know before?
Yeah. So I think our interview process is very thorough, and that's not just for Ken or the offensive coordinator position. That's for any employee that we hire. That could be, our head of equipment. That was me when I was, interviewing for the general manager position, and largely because if you just maybe step back for a second. All right, like if you have a multi-billion-dollar organization and you're hiring like a CEO position or a COO position or a department head, think about like the time and effort that would take to go into vetting candidates that would perform that function in your organization, and that's really how we think about it. With our organization, with the Browns. So Ken's right. He went through a battery of different items, and he came outstanding, and we're really excited about him. It's a good question, Tony. I think that, number one, I would say about this, I always think it's maybe a little bit short-sighted for people to judge an individual off of their, one of their weaker moments, a moment of emotion. Ken is uber competitive. You should ask the Buffalo guys. He's like urban legend when it comes to pick up hoops in terms of how competitive he is. But we have no concerns about him, being able to, manage the players, manage the coaches, manage himself. I love having competitive coaches. I love having competitive players, and he's really fit in really well with us. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the first part of your question.
You guys obviously had a number of injuries this year at the quarterback position. Obviously, how do you balance not living in the fears of we had all these injuries, but also trying to make sure you do the guys that had depth?
Well, you don't have to worry about us living in our fears. We don't really have. That injuries are part of the game. So that really won't change our functioning. Obviously, it's something that we've looked at pretty intently over the last couple of weeks because of the volume of injuries that we've had, and making sure we're doing everything in our power to maximize player availability. But in terms of being worried about that, or it's football. Yeah.
2 more, we're gonna wrap. Special teams this year, Ken Dorsey on offense. What is it like for you to have to be the GM with so many changes to important parts of the coaching?
I think the only constant in the NFL is change, realistically, whether you're successful or unsuccessful. I think that the way we look at it is, we love having stability, and I love working with Kevin on a consistent basis, but that won't always mean continuity. Just like we talked about earlier, over the past couple of weeks, our mind is towards improvement, and sometimes that can lead to change. And so that'll really be our mindset every year as we go into the offseason. What are the things that we can do, add, subtract, change, that will allow us ultimately to reach a Super Bowl?
What's been your vantage point of watching Adam kind of transition to the last year?
It's been pretty cool. Honestly, it's been really neat. I'm super proud of him. I know I'm biased, but I think he's really good, and he's a pretty fast learner. Pretty good looking too, that type of thing. But he loves it in Philly. He's learning from the best GM of the sport, the best front office in the sport, and I'm really pleased to see his progress so far. So.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.